And in that time, a space. In this eventual space so far out of nowhere exists something. Something that exists in all the living and does not disappear when life ends. That something is located on a distant place. It is located near you, next to you, within you. Follow me into the recesses of what exists on and in between, the darkness and light in your mind, in your heart, and even in your eyes, where some say the soul's window lies. Drift with us where truth and illusion isn't far, caught in a deadlock. Which will win? Welcome to Truth, Talks, and Theory. Please stand by.
Peace and blessings upon you, viewers. Welcome to Truth, Talks, and Theory. On today's episode, we will be talking about current issues, discussing the reality of sexuality and identity. And here we have as our panel the co-founders of Truth Theory Center. Truth Theory Center is a nonprofit organization that provides spiritual support and counseling aimed at encouraging individuals to pursue virtues, overcome vices, and ultimately get closer to God. I am one of the co-founders, and my name is Michaela.
I'm Tong.
I'm David.
And Schweib. So I will start this by reading off a paper I wrote. This paper includes many thoughts, and I hope that you viewers will appreciate some of the things that I am going to say. It's going to be from the topic that Michaela had brought up, which is identity and sexuality. Let's begin with understanding principles. So understanding principles in ethics are far simpler than what pseudo-intellectualism attempts to make it. Life, to what we are given to understand at the center of itself, your existence, is simple. Function should follow form, and morality should follow what is sensible. Sensibility is thoughtfulness without the presence of rashness or hasty desire. This all relates to the topic at hand: homosexuality, identity crisis, and man-made purpose. When something goes beyond its natural law, it begins to warp and betray the truth of its existence. This is especially the case with people, given we have the greatest capacity for free will. A mind, body, and being that lose their natural purpose will enter a state of irritability, instability, and an itch requiring the void of purpose to be filled. The purpose of the mind being to think or to produce thought, the purpose of the body being to work, and the purpose of the being to serve. This is where society will push to fill that purpose due to its secularism here in the West. These things come in many forms: purpose in your achievement, purpose in your love life, purpose in procuring wealth, etc. These, however, all being man-made purposes, will always be unable to fill the exact piece that is missing. If we were to behave closer in line with our true purpose, our service to God, we begin feeling a sense of peace and tenderness. However, Western society cannot be tolerant and peaceable to all and make our purpose with God its major focus. So they are left to attempt to continue propagating the next thing to push the filling of that void. That concludes what I have written.
One thing that I did like when you mentioned about how due to that missing part in somebody, they have that void, and due to that void, they experience all these emotions, like you said, of feeling annoyed. I think you would put another one of feeling irritable. So like all these emotions come out of them lacking this fulfillment inside of them. And because of that, they start searching out for other things to find that purpose and fulfillment.
I felt the same thing. With my deep desire to connect to another human being in my teenage years, I couldn't remember at one point where I found the peace in that pursuit. it felt like a never-ending struggle to achieve a false sense of happiness that I had idealized in my head.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like someone saying that if they were only famous, or if they were only in a particular movie as a lead actor, they would be happy or fulfilled. That's the type of issue and the thinking we're coming across.
So in truth, you're talking about the illusion, because I know in our earlier episodes we talked about the illusion and talked about, I don't know if we fully went into details about corrupt desire, or the chase to fulfill a seeking, something that you're actually seeking. So you're touching on that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I definitely can see, especially at our younger years, the desire to fill that hole in ourselves, to push towards something, to distract our mind, to just not want to be part of, to want to be part of something. That's the thing.
Do you guys remember the first time we had learned about prayer and we had put our forehead to the ground for God?
Like you're saying, to look back and what were like the feelings, the
peace,
experience,
the peace, the purpose, the awesome fulfillment I had felt. It was nothing like what society proposes as its major purpose. When have we seen in a recent movie or media outlet outline what that sensation is? Even something as simple as prayer.
I don't think that is something that is talked about, or something that is shown, or something that is truly understood, to be completely honest with you. And when I say completely like understood, I mean in a way that you're able to convey that, because I think that in times where you look in media where there's portrayals of people who are religious, and I don't want to get sidetracked, but oftentimes you'll find that either they're being made fun of, or it's an issue where they're religious, but then for whatever reason, they're breaking all the rules of the religion. So it doesn't really give you a full scope or full understanding of what that experience would be like, having an intimate prayer where you're completely soul searching and you're finding that peace and that fulfillment within it. So yeah, I understand what you mean.
The closest thing to prayer I had felt in fulfillment to was acts of charity. And that's exactly what I had spoken about earlier. Anytime you commit to an action that is in line with your purpose, it's almost like God is leaving a breadcrumb of the certain acts that would be very fortuitous for a human being to experience.
So what would you say would be the difference between people that are pursuing worldly desires or purpose, and then themselves saying like they also feel a sense of, I guess, quotation, peace or fulfillment, whether it's family or a job? So promotion, family, getting married, having kids, like that would be their goal. And once reaching that, you'll hear a lot of times people say, I did my part, or this is what my life's meant to be, and I'm happy now.
Happiness and contentness are two different things. I could be content doing a lot of things, but that itch in that void will not be replaced by even something that society pushes up for the majority of your life, which is to have a family, to live in peace, to go to work and come home. The people that have that fulfillment in their work is they're fulfilling the purpose of the body to work, which gives them some sense of purpose. But that purpose lacks a lot of peaceability, and they start feeling that itch. So hence you juggle in this society, you juggle two things. They want you to work and then pursue entertainment. that should conclude your day, which is you make sure that you fulfill the purpose of the body, which is to work. But then when that is satiated, you come home and they just distract until your next workday.
Yeah, I can say from personal experience, there's a definite peace that comes with spiritual acts and accepting the truth. You can go through your day without that empty feeling, as long as you're fulfilling what God asks of you. And when you're not fulfilling what God asks of you, I definitely feel the void and the desire and the itch to move.
That's the crazy part. When we began to take our, once again going back to prayer, when we started taking our prayers more serious, the times of prayer that God prescribes, how much time and effort does it actually take to pray? And how much does the illusion, as Michaela encapsulated, attempt to dissuade you from that, despite knowing that if you were to engage in that prayer sincerely, not distractedly, sincerely, it sets a tone for the rest of the day, that there is this peace and security with God.
True.
There is no peace and security when it comes to indulgence in anything that society or the worldly has to offer. There is temporary euphoria. After that euphoric moment is concluded, you're left with an empty feeling once again to chase a similar one. It's the same reason why people watch continuous sequels of things, because that initial feeling they had, they just want to replicate it. So they so desperately want society to fulfill that next part of their purpose. So it's a wonder why the entertainment industry is like $1 billion industry.
So far, how I'm seeing it too is that when people are engaging in those type of acts, when we talk about charity and other spiritual acts, it's directed towards purpose, towards a purpose, and when that's completed, we have that feeling, we have that almost like contentness, but that hole is being filled. Versus other people that don't have that direction and they engage in things like, if it's entertainment, that hole's not being filled, but rather they're distracting themselves from that hole, and it's almost if time is, to them, it's just pause. Time is still moving forward, but what they feel is not being filled up. That everything's paused, and once that entertainment is done, they're just still left in the same position, still left with the same feeling, with the same emptiness.
I'll bring it akin closer to filling your stomach with junk food, rather than
That's a
complete
good one.
emptiness. It's almost like eating something that makes you feel a whole lot worse, and slowly your very being deteriorates from so much consumption of it.
So being overly and openly sexual in our society should not be a normalized thing. One of the reasons why is because this desire and this acceptance is being shown to our children. It's being shown to be glamorous, but this is not meant to be the way that we should be living. These activities should be kept private. When it comes down to it, we are made to be heterosexual. A clear example of being openly and overtly sexual in our society is the clear consequence of STDs and STIs. If we follow the laws of God, and you follow that you should save your sexual activities after marriage, and if people followed through with that, it would be easily seen that STIs and STDs would dramatically drop, and it would be such a rare case for them to appear.
Yeah, I concur with many points you made. One of the major points is overly sexualized society. One of the things that comes to me now is even something like wrestling. Wrestling was such a big thing when I was a kid, and I remember so many people were watching it. And when you look back at some of the things that they did and continue to do, such as having high exposure of women, literally having them be half naked and brought in front of crowds, that within those crowds there's families with kids. In truth, how do you expect that type of society that not only celebrates nudity, that they put it up as entertainment, right? As almost public entertainment. The natural consequence to that is people desiring more and more sexual partners, romances, etc., outside of what the Abrahamic faiths have concluded, which is marriage.
Yeah, or to add to what you're saying, in our society growing up, as a teenager, we were taught it's normalized to, one, chase girls, and to two, to have these sexual conquests, to be like, this is part of being a man, and that if you don't lose your virginity at a certain age, you'd be a loser, and that it's not respectable to be a virgin.
I was actually thinking about a conversation that we've had quite a while ago, actually, about on both ends. So kind of what you were saying in terms of what the male expectation is, but also on the female side as well. So you have these images of girls or women or whatever, dressing very provocatively or engaging in very sexually suggestive or seductive behaviors like dance moves and things like that. So in one way, it sets an expectation for boys, young boys, about what they desire, they find interesting, or they find appealing. So it sets an expectation of what they want in a woman or a girl. And then for girls, it sets an expectation of, okay, this is how I should be. So it's a self-perpetuating kind of circle definitely. Of how how we view that material. And I actually want to point out that the promotion of sexuality is not just in what you see, but it's obviously also in music and what you hear, as well as in books, sexual eroticism in terms of how explicit some things are with how they talk about sex and sexuality. So yeah, it's very prevalent within our society.
And as David said, that stuff caused so much spiritual harm to individuals finding true satisfaction with someone in a very clean and chaste romance. That is not even saying the massive damage it causes to somebody's body through, as David indicated, infections and all these other issues that come up. So what happens to kids that are sold the idea that love fills that itch I brought up, and teenagers finding themselves being in love with one another, and in this case I'm talking about a boy and girl, and it producing a pregnancy.
And to even add to that, the other sin of things like Plan B and abortions, that's a even bigger issue that comes out of it. Fornication is a sin, but now we're talking about we're talking about another big topic of killing a possible child, or killing a child, period.
Which the Quran explicitly tells all of its readers and believers not to do. As soon as you start crossing those lines, there's very little lines you won't cross. So,
another worst part is dehumanizing that activity, as trying to normalize even that.
Well, the other thing that comes to mind too is just talking about the whole exposure aspect of it, where I know you mentioned other things like novels, music, like that's a big portion too. But just even the accessibility that people, even young kids, have access to on the internet,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That's just so huge that anyone can go on and just search something up and just be exposed to whatever it is that whether they might think of or other people might talk about, but just the exposure itself influences their mind to search out, and essentially they're free to look for what they feel or might be curious about, which harms their mind.
The truth is, every single thing that I've consumed that has added to any level of sexual perversion, be it a movie, be it a book, be it a song, I regret. I regret all of that. Because without that, I would have so much less of a struggle doing and committing myself and my life to the pious living that God would want me to. So the conditioning that I was set at an early age, and thank God I wasn't one of the worst to have it, but it was enough where sex was an important thing, and it was important enough that it was fused with love. And in that pursuit, there's just been so much additive conditioning, even brainwashing, that a type of society that promotes that is so irresponsible in. And they're creating these young boys en masse.
Yeah. Even when you mention like how it changes things, the whole like exposure aspect of it, the part that also it's so horrible, it's just the skewness of understanding of what love is, or what a relationship should be, what marriage even should be. All that itself is being changed to how things are being told and done now. People that are exercising, like you said, things outside of marriage, or even things in marriage but multiple partners or whatever, all that is just being accepted. But part of that is also that exposure that people are facing, be it online or stories. Again, all that, it is, like you said, it's being normalized. It's something that is wrong, it's being seen as okay and being accepted.
So I guess what you're talking about there is like the moral degradation, or degradation. I'm not sure if I'm saying the right word right, but the degrading of morals within our society.
Yeah.
Right.
So on this topic, when it comes to homosexuality, how is it not seen as a sexual deviancy anymore? Even right now in our society, incest and bestiality are not accepted socially and are completely illegal. And there was a time where homosexuality, bestiality, incest were treated in the same light.
It's an excellent question, and it goes hand in hand with the definition of moral turpitude, which is the degrading of our moral systems that come from Judeo-Christian foundations. That at one point in time, the idea of courtship was how one would begin attempting to have a romance in their life. And then it became dating, then it became loose dating. And the looser it got, the more the rules and the laws were bent and broken until we arrive at this conclusion, which is the priority is the relationship and the feelings of love, and not at the moral implications of what that looks like.
I guess the point that I was going to talk about with regards to how has there been this change, and how do people view the difference between homosexuality and things like the other things that you talked about, voyeurism, incest. Currently, as it stands, homosexuality has been defined as a sexual orientation, essentially meaning that like people were born or have this disposition that this is what their preference is. Now, language has changed so much, because if you were to take this back 200 years ago, this concept of sexual orientation isn't captured the way that we capture it now, right? So language plays a role in how it changes people's attitudes or the way that they look at things. So there's so many different levels and points in history that have changed things to come to the point that we're at. I think what we're seeing now, though, is just that when it comes to homosexuality, it's taken quite a bit of decades, but when it comes to the issue of transgenderism and other things of that nature, there's just been so much more of it's been expedited almost, like within the last 5 years, so much has changed.
There's several things you brought up. So much, to be honest. You covered so much ground that I wanted to contribute my thoughts to, my insights. And the reality of what homosexuality represents is sexual perversions taken to identify someone. Furthermore, being an inclusivity to the pride behind that identity, and as a result, forming some sort of push with the idea that it's courageous to be homosexual. So in that way, they hijack the virtue, which means to combat your fears, and they turn their lack of fear of their immorality into a cause. It's one of the biggest ways the shaitan uses people to manipulate their good qualities and turn them into these movements of corruption. Just like we could discuss anything of that sort, the idolatry that comes from having a homosexual figure or representation as a hero or a movie. The other day, I grew up as a kid with a bunch of heroes. Spider-Man, Ninja Turtles. The amount of the LGBT agenda, even in kids' TV shows, is ridiculous. Back in the 90s, they didn't allow such things to take place because they didn't want the minds of kids to be shaped. They wanted the kids to have fun with the colors. They wanted the kids to have fun with the concepts of heroism and the virtues that come with creativity. These specific villains had these interesting backstories, and ultimately the hero triumphs. Now it's not good versus evil, it's open sexual liberty versus good. But they try to put both on the same side. So as long as they have good heroes that are next to these LGBT characters, etc., fighting against evil, it's such a simple way to make them seem like the good guys. There's certain immoral behaviors that are offensive to God, and if I can, I want to steer clear from. And I want my family to steer clear from.
I think all that's honestly just a fair point to make, and fair assessment in how you want to approach things even down the line in that way too. And what I really like too is how you mentioned the virtue of courage, where they're taking a virtue, whether it's courage, whether it's love, whether it's anything else in that aspect, and shaping it or even taking it for their own hijacking, yeah, perfect. Hijacking it to means that kind of warps it in a way that takes away the actual true virtue out of it. So now people are going to view, like you said, the virtue of courage in that light, where the virtue of courage is so much greater than that. Now, I know we mentioned a couple of times already in our conversation about kids and how, they're being influenced and exposed to so many things. The things now that happening is that they're the ones being targeted at such a young age. The reason why they're even being targeted is the sheer fact that being kids, they like engaging in so many things. But as soon as they engage in something that's considered for the opposite gender, that becomes an issue. The only reason why it becomes an issue is because of this whole agenda that's being pushed forward. It's causing it to be an issue, right? Due to them having such a loud voice now and just pushing so many things forward, it's causing parents in those situations to be concerned, to worry about what their child is doing and what they're engaging in. But in truth, if they were just to, leave their child alone, not be concerned with it because there isn't an issue, things will sort out itself. Kids change their mind on so many things so many times, and they even play pretend on so many things too, but those things don't rise any type of concern. But now it does, but only now it does. It's because it's those gender change issue is being pushed forward, right? So the sheer fact that kids now are being targeted on that when it was never like that in the past is a huge place for concern, because they're tackling on kids that don't have the actual mental capacity to recognize what that means down the line, what that means in the future.
Sure.
When they go on those things, like those blockers, they don't understand the actual consequences that it has. They don't understand exactly what it's doing. Even if explained, you can't expect a child to really comprehend that magnitude of concern or even importance.
A good documentary that supports that theory is Matt Walsh's What is a Woman? And there is someone that experiences that, where they go through that whole process, come to regret it greatly. So allowing kids to make that decision is so absurd. I can't even imagine how we've come to a point where children, I don't even know how young are they putting them on puberty blockers?
They're only allowed to go on as soon as they start puberty. So it could be, somebody could start at 10, somebody could start at 12, so it really depends on that.
That's absurd.
As a 10-year-old, if whatever reason, I looked up to the Ninja Turtles and I said I want to be a Ninja Turtle, does that mean that the parents should take me that serious to start considering whether I want to pursue the life of a turtle or a ninja? And in that case, if that wasn't the case in the past, why are we giving into the same idiosyncrasies now more than ever? It's because people are so desperate to be served this false purpose of theirs, to get this euphoria out of fulfilling this identity. They're willing to trample on the lives of anyone else in the process. And that includes kids. The more they can recruit to their cause, the more they can convince parents to observe their kids and turn their mild curiosities into major cases of life-altering decisions that are unnatural. The happier they feel. It's not exaggerated to call it evil.
Like, one thing that comes to mind too with the whole process of it is the sheer fact that through the process of puberty itself, they need that. You need that to actually start growing and maturing your body and your mind to a suitable I wouldn't say age, sorry, but it's just to a suitable beginning to be a young adult. So by doing that and by blocking it, you're stopping that process that your body needs in order to hit that certain point of growth.
True.
And I just wanted to bring up another point, going back to what you mentioned about the hormone blockers and the use of that. So just to clarify that there are side effects. I know that there's been people who have said there's absolutely no side effects, but with any medication.
And reversible.
There are definitely yes, they've also talked about it being reversible, but with any medication, there's always side effects.
Absolutely.
And so we can't be ignorant to that. Another point that I've also recognized is that in regards to how it's being prescribed, is it's actually being, these hormone blockers are actually being used as an off-label basis, not an actual what the medication was actually designed to do. So aka what it means is that a medication has a particular purpose in terms of when it was created, when it was studied and evaluated, and that's the purpose that is put on the market. But if it is known to have certain side effects or certain other benefits that it can, that medication can provide, it can also be prescribed as an off-label use. So that's how.
And in this case, what was it originally prescribed for?
Originally, it's prescribed for individuals, children who were actually experiencing puberty a lot earlier on in their life. So, for example, if they were showing signs of puberty at 6 or 7, very rare cases, right? But the idea there was to try to delay that individual's experience of going through puberty so that it could be deferred to a period of time of which it would occur more naturally amongst their peers.
And also, it was also used for people men with cancer. So I know originally it was used for that too, to help treat that, which later on they found a chemical within that actually they start using for prisoners to essentially sterilize them.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was something that was discovered. So like initially it was never meant to be
that
blockers
has
for
to be
children,
extremely potent
but
then.
yeah, so the sheer fact that they found that and they're using it for prisoners, that's that very same thing, like you said, off-brand, right? It's being used in kids for those blockers.
So you're telling me they're using a chemical sterilizer on children?
By the medication, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And even with the things that they may say of, if you're on it, it's fine, it's no big deal. You could just get off it. But there is consequences that comes with it, and that's one thing. The main thing can be looked up, where your bone density is decreased too, which, something might say that you can take calcium, you can do exercise, there's other means to do it, but the sheer fact that it's something that your body is having trouble with should be a place for concern. And it doesn't mean that, once you get off it, it's just going to go back to normal. But there are cases where there are kids that grow and have a lesser amount of bone density compared to other people, compared to their own peers.
When we say there are cases, this is so new that there isn't even things to compare to.
True, yeah.
That's how forceful this thing is. That they don't even have a proper testing period before it being administered to kids. And that's what I find extremely alarming.
And that kids are making this choice, not even the parents.
Yeah.
I'll be talking about Bill C-4, which is a law that was passed here in Canada banning conversion therapy in 2022. So conversion therapy, as defined by the Government of Canada within this law, is any service, practice, or treatment that is designed to change a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual or their gender identity to cisgender. This law is inclusive of any direction or advice that intentionally delays or impedes a person's self-acceptance of their gender identity or sexual orientation. This law includes giving any direction or advice to a consenting adult. The fact that this law seeks to ban, or this law actually bans consenting adults to engaging in seeking guidance and help regarding their gender identity and sexual orientation has major implications. The major implications of this law make it difficult, particularly for people of religious faith, to have critical conversations and to seek help from their religious or spiritual teachers and guides. It makes it very difficult, especially when you take into account that these guides and spiritual teachers actually recognize the spiritual and transcendent element to a human being, so i.e. like the soul. They also acknowledge and recognize that yes, there is this life, but there is also an afterlife. So this law doesn't seek to criminalize conversations in which a person expresses their opinion on sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, unless that conversation forms part of a larger intervention that is aimed at changing their sexual.
When you say forms a part of a larger intervention, what does that mean?
Just means that as long as there is the intent to actually change a person to heterosexual.
Okay, so
or
what you're saying is the conversation, not that there needs to be a large group of people.
no,
Okay.
just means that there's whether it's a program or
A one-on-one.
one-on-one session, just means that there's an active attempt or
So a service that
Mm.
we in Truth Theory Center would provide.
yeah, that would be inclusive of that as well. And you just need to note that it doesn't criminalize the opposite or the reverse of that. So in terms of encouraging or guiding somebody to homosexuality or transgenderism, like there's nothing there that would be considered criminal. Whereas trying to advise or guide somebody to heterosexuality or to accept the gender of which they were born with.
How does
would
that
be
make
considered
sense?
crime.
If I was, for whatever reason, a person that, and this could very well happen, I'm deluded or delusional, and I want my kids to grow up as homosexual or as the opposite of the gender that they are, the sex that they're naturally born with. You're saying that legally I can influence them all throughout their life to either be homosexual, bisexual, etc., or my child that happens to be a boy to become a girl. And that is legal.
It's not covered in this law. This law does not consider that a criminal act.
But it criminalizes the idea that if your child or somebody came up to you asking you to help in this particular area where they believe they're questioning their gender or they're questioning their sexual orientation, you cannot be honest with them. You can only push them to continue in that path, but you can't say like maybe you shouldn't.
So that's actually a really good question. So they consider interventions that allow individuals to explore or develop their own identity as being permissible or not prohibited, provided that they don't have an underlying assumption that a particular gender identity or sexual orientation or gender expression is inherently better or more preferred over another. So why it kind of disproportionately makes it difficult for people of a religious background, particularly that of Abrahamic faiths, is there's already a set precedence that we know that heterosexuality is what is morally acceptable and not anything outside of that. Likewise, God has defined what a man and a woman is and that they are not of the same. That's even quoted in the Quran, right? So that's why it makes it particularly disproportionately challenging for people who are of religious faith.
That seems ironically discriminatory against anyone with a faith, especially anyone that is in a position to spiritually guide or teach someone, or for example a priest or an imam, to help someone in their congregation or following, redirect them to something as normal as heterosexuality.
This law makes it particularly difficult for an individual that is seeking to find spiritual wholeness and an individual that wants to have their desires and their behaviors align with their spiritual beliefs, particularly those of Abrahamic faiths. As any believing person knows, that just as one seeks to purify themselves of immoralities and of vices such as greed, materialism, hate, etc., lust and sexual immoral behaviors are all captured within that same scope as well. So how do we support somebody that is questioning, unsure, maybe has these desires or have engaged in these behaviors and are seeking to make changes? They want to change because of their faith. They want to change because they want to get close to God. It puts it in a very precarious position. This law makes it so that you can have conversation and you can have an opinion. However, you cannot have that conversation with any intention or any aim to guide a person in a direction or in a way in which God would want you to guide them.
To be honest, I wanted to add, if people can, we should fight against this law, especially because it's new. It'd be wise to look into how someone could reverse such thing, because that has way too much implications of how one would lose their religion and lose the connection to God that would require them to behave in certain ways and deem certain actions immoral.
Yeah, I can completely see situations where people in that position would want to seek their religious leader and to ask for their advice, but that would put their religious leader in a position where they can actually be convicted, correct?
Mm-hmm. And I think, from what I know, it's the conviction could be up to even 5 years of imprisonment.
So that is atrocious. So a person comes to you asking for your honest advice, your honest opinion, your help, and that could just saying that could just lead you to prison. How is that not discriminatory towards religion?
It's oppressive and it's quite unjust.
Especially if the opposite is not true, where if you have these questions and you went to the LGBT community or you went to a counselor that supports gender affirmation, they can easily push you in that direction and nothing would happen to them.
There's quite a bit of double standard.
Yeah. And I know, like, part of it too, it sounded like they try to make it seem okay by saying you can say your opinion, but the underlying thing is that you can't push them towards that direction of correctness. I mean, that's the part also that is very unfortunate, that the sheer fact that they're trying to make it seem okay. But the truth of the matter is, if you can't sway someone away from the wrong path to the correct path, then it defeats the whole purpose for somebody going to another one for counseling and help.
It's a really good
How
point.
can you truly help somebody if you're going to be condemned for it?
It's a matter of people and legalizing these laws. The ones that have pushed this agenda to this degree, they need to get some pushback, or else this will just continuously get worse and worse for anyone that has the integrity of their faith.
Yeah, so essentially, this law criminalizes providing spiritual and scriptural guidance to a consenting adult. And I think that's where I find it just very interesting, because even with looking at this law had actually been, the bill had actually been created years before. In 2020, I believe that it was being put to Parliament as Bill C-6 at the time is what it was under. And it was very clear at that time that they said that this law would be for providing any conversion therapy against somebody's will. But they've completely removed that aspect of being against somebody's will. And so that's where I'm looking at this and seeing that it's so broad in its scope of what it's trying to criminalize that it totally could allow religious people to be put in the same predicament unjustly.
Yeah, this easily leads to what I want to talk about next, is just the slippery slope of our sexually open society. That with this acceptance of changing genders and homosexuality, these things were, like I said before, were shunned in the past. And there's certain things now that we still shun, but the way this is looking is that this is just going to open a pathway of other sinful things to be accepted into the future. Incest. Now, if we're talking about incest, we know that this is just wrong, that this is an absurd idea to even think about. But we're talking, the big thing about homosexuality is their biggest argument is two consenting adults. What if an 18-year-old son and his mother, being whatever older age she is, being consensual adults and accepting one another and saying that they love each other, and that
in the sexual manner.
In the sexual manner, considering marriage as a possible direction to go into. Well, in our laws would be like the procreation is the biggest issue. But with transsexuality, they try to surgically change themselves to try to fit that gender that they believe they are.
So you're saying they're going to use science to somehow even manipulate their bodies or however to make it that they can have children, not necessarily with each other, but a child, and raise it in a home where the original mother had a son and now they share a son together. That's so absurd that that relationship hasn't even been defined yet, which is a mother having a son with their son. Like, that relationship hasn't even been conceived yet.
I guess what you're trying to say is that there's no moral grounds for it not to happen.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And even like the grounds that are being used now, it's like you said, love. Love is the grounds of them justifying who can be together. And in the future, you're saying when it goes down that route and becomes a thing, they're going to use the same amount of reasoning where because they love one another, they should be together.
Yeah, it's not an absurd thing to believe that can happen. Even right now, we have ways to sterilize a woman and sterilize a man so that they can't have children. So that would be the obvious first step. Be like, well, we can't conceive children. What is the problem? And that there is a problem. And it's because that they're pushing this ideology of consent and sexual acceptance that they don't see where it's going. They think that when homosexuality was being accepted, we thought it was going to end there. Then people started changing their identities, believing one way of the opposite of what they're born into, saying that there's this variability between man and woman. So incest is not absurd. And then the next thing would be bestiality. Now we think that is even crazier than the other two, because these aren't even humans anymore. How can an animal consent? But the reality is, with the development of science and the development of our knowledge and understanding, animals are a lot more emotionally diverse and more intelligent than we ever thought they ever were. 2021, a woman was banned in Belgium at the Belgian Zoo for having an inappropriate relationship with a chimpanzee. The zookeepers monitored this, and they saw that this particular chimpanzee was slowly getting ostracized by the rest of his species because he preferred the interaction with this human woman than his other companions.
Are you talking about like in a sexual way?
That I cannot verify. She would say that they have this intimate bond, and that she has snuck into it. But I cannot say for 100% fact what she did or did not do with this. But if
it implies a type of romantic setting.
Exactly.
Saying, wow.
Okay.
And this is a case that has happened recently. Over the years, these cases would pop up, but this is literally last year, 2 years ago. And this woman claims that she is in love with this chimpanzee.
So what would that look like in our modern society?
Now imagine we start accepting the opinion and consent of animals. We have trained chimpanzees to speak sign language. This chimpanzee in the future could be in court defending himself, saying that he is in love with this woman. As absurd as it seems, that is very much true. The chimpanzee can tell you how he feels. So he would be able to defend this. Imagine the lawyers being involved. Imagine how this would look.
The absurd nature of this whole thing seems like a plot in a comedy movie. But I remember watching Mrs. Doubtfire, where the plot of the comedy was a man pretending to be an old woman to be close to his kids. And that was hilarious because it's so jarringly unnatural that you can't help but find comedic relief in it and know that it's a joke. So to laugh at something like a chimpanzee in the courtroom giving consent to a human being that is also giving consent, and they're affirming that sick type of bond, that romantic bond, it is laughable and it is absurd. It sounds like a really poor made movie plot line, but here we are again. I want to know what it's going to be like when somebody's kid falls in love with their pet, and then the adults are told to accept that love as something mutual, and the diseases and the sicknesses that come with it, somehow using medication or some sort of scientific breakdown into how that could still be applied or safe.
That is exactly how humans try to circumvent things that seem to have natural consequence. Is that they try to fix it with modern medicine. They try to fix the human. They try to manipulate the human so that it can fit whatever narrative that their minds have for themselves.
The biggest argument against homosexuality back then still sticks. It is a breeding ground for sexual diseases, a breeding ground. And some people will say gay men, but that is also incorrect. That also includes lesbians. It is a breeding ground for these sexual issues. And what does all that mean? That means that our design is not designed to do that. And when our design is being perverted in that way, the consequences of it are very natural, which you start having some serious illnesses that make somebody's life absolutely miserable. If there is God, and I certainly believe so, that seems like a very realistic route to take on punishing his creation.
Like when are we gonna choose to say no to our corrupt desires? To recognize that this is not progressing our society. This is not progression. That this is absurd, unnatural, and wrong. When can we just say that freely and not be ostracized?
At this point, criminalized, really.
Criminalized.
That's a really good point. I was actually thinking about when you were talking about bestiality and all these
Scary
and absurd
frightening
things.
concepts.
I was remembering a conversation I was having with a friend that discussed how there are individuals that are out there that are currently trying to actively advocate for pedophilia, as a sexual orientation as opposed to a divergent, clearly currently
Sexual deviation.
yes, sexual
No.
deviation and socially unacceptable. So if there's a push or a movement to try to see if it could be defined as a sexual orientation, then that would reduce stigma.
Of course, and that's what happened with homosexuality. The last point I want to discuss, as I have written here, is what happened in regards to sexual liberalism. When discussing what it means to be chaste and the problem with keeping chaste and being at peace, is it requires the development and understanding of the virtue and purpose behind it. Without it, we are simply left to choose between our desire and self-restraint. What that means is, with no legal system pushing back against that desire, we can only expect people en masse to fall for the same trap that is lustfulness. The same rule can be applied to anything, such as intoxicants. With the big push for sexual liberty, people continue to pursue their pleasures in trade of purpose. This was in the form of love, the ideology of what it means to be in love with someone. People fell into this idea of love with one another and had sexual relations. Now, modern social climate was more about being able to not only indulge in our desires and wants, but the need to express it. Most religions have a very key element involved, and that is to correct one's behavior and desires. This has to do with self-control and restraint. However, religion is being taught less, and the advocates in the religious communities prioritize peace above principle. And this has allowed room for the much more louder and aggressive voices to take public spaces, till our society was forced to change and produce icons for their movement. As such, the sanctity of marriage has been compromised, and now it's replaced or its laws distorted far beyond the initial holy matrimony that it was intended to be. The hollowing effects of the loss of purpose was becoming more and more detrimental to our spiritual health. The initial thrill and desire for recognition faded among people, which led them to crave the cause more than the initial short-term victory they had set for themselves. What that means is the people that want to experience this purpose with their identity is attempting to fill that void I had expressed earlier, the void to serve. However, when that happens, it is short term, unless it is constantly celebrated and put into the spotlight. Much like fame, they become hungry for it, they crave it. And the way they keep it going is to have more and more people added to their cause. The cause starts becoming this purpose rather than the safety and the comfort of their identity. So, what they're attempting to sell us is not what is the reality. The agenda, let's not misunderstand anything. The agenda for homosexuality, transgenderism, and all affiliates with it is far more about the push to serve a cause for the sake of the emptiness they feel as a result of the lostness they have in their relationship with God than it is about the desire for justice. If justice was the primary concern for a community, it'd be apparent in how they treat their poor, their neighbors, or even each other in their everyday lives. To conclude, when one strays from their purpose and design that God had put for them, they are forced to create false ones in their place, ultimately failing to do so. As such, God created and paired men and women, then established the laws of marriage to ensure non-promiscuity and stability in a home. And since the forefathers of men were able to commit even acts such as murder. Sexual perversions of all kinds is no surprise. But it would be amiss to not be a voice and ensure our integrity is intact. So we here ask you, in your own way, please support and honor the families and marriages that are intended and designed for us to have.
And with my last words, I just want to say that with everything that comes together, one thing that I do recognize is that, these people, they don't wake up one day and just decide that they want to be the opposite gender. It's not without influence, and because of that influence that affect their minds by other groups and other people, I stand against that. I'm not associating myself with it, nor am I supporting it, but the ones, or rather, what I do support is God, and what He deems to be correct, and what He tells me to fight against. So all this is something that I do not stand for, nor do I support.
The unfortunate push of this ideology is that there's not allowed a civil discussion between the opposite opinion. With the tone of our society, it's simply calling the opposite side bigots, ignorant, or just simply trying to silence them because it doesn't fit their agenda. If we were allowed to have a civil discussion, this push wouldn't be as effective. But because they're deciding to shut people down instead of allowing people to listen, which is ironically enough what they're saying that's happening to them. So my point is, we need to be able to talk about this freely without this arrogant and oppressive attitude that they believe that we are showing to them.
And my message really for the viewers, for even each other, is really to stand firm. Kind of similar sentiments that you shared, Tan, with standing firm for God's message and God's guidance, because at the end of the day, He is our moral compass, and He's the one who has provided guidance, provided purpose that sets the foreground for our morality. In all honesty, other people just don't simply have that. Their morality is based off of public opinion, essentially based off of the desires of what the public or the majority is encouraging. To be honest and to be completely fair, political leaders have certainly failed in completely representing or accurately representing their constituencies or their constituents, the people that have actually put them into that position. They've succumbed to seeking approval, popularity, votes, even maybe financial gain from them getting paid to be in that position. They've chosen that as opposed to maintaining or holding a form of morality, especially one that is based on what God has guided us. So let's not fall into the same trap in being fearful of the disapproval of others, not being liked by others, or being called names by others, but rather put our faith and our security in God, who has guided us both in this life and, God willing, will guide us into the afterlife as well.
Amen.
So thank you for joining us here at Truth Talks and Theory while we discuss the agenda. Hopefully you enjoyed this little bit of an informal podcast. We will continue to produce videos regarding our virtues and discussion of vices, but should we ever want to explore a similar topic that is very prevalent and we need to get a message out there, we might do it in a similar format. So look forward to those. Thank you so much for any person willing to hear us out and listen to this. And most of all, stay safe, God bless, and hope to see you in our next video.